Let's meet together in our Bibles in the book of Ecclesiastes, and we're going to be in chapter 1. Chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, as well as chapter 2, is where we'll be. I'm a city boy by admission. I've never had the ability to deny that. I grew up in an urban neighborhood in Las Vegas, Nevada. And yes, people grow up in Las Vegas. If you were wondering, we don't all live in hotels and casinos. We do live in neighborhoods and streets and all of that. And that's where I grew up. I didn't hunt. I didn't camp. I didn't love hunting and camping. It wasn't part of the culture in which I grew up. And then in 2007, God moved my wife and I to Cortez, Colorado. Now, if you've ever been to Cortez, Colorado, you know that you hunt or you die. You're not accepted into the culture. You are not welcomed. City boys are not supposed to be there. You're supposed to hunt. And I've told you this before, and I've told you the story before. And I remember that I figured, well, hey, when in Rome, right? Just embrace it. So when in Cortez, I just embraced hunting, and I became a not a very great white hunter. And I began wandering through the woods. I really call them hikes with guns more than I really did hunting. I was walking through the woods often wondering, what in the world do people do this for? There are no animals out here. Where are they all at? I didn't even see signs of animals, or at least I didn't know what I was looking for. And I was on this incredible hunt constantly that left me disappointed and frustrated and empty and discouraged and thinking, what's the point? Until my pursuit was transformed when I met a couple of guys who were, in fact, unbelievable hunters. These guys tested the wind. I think they even picked up grass and tasted it to make sure what was going on there. They literally, all of my hours and days of wandering looking for elk, within the first morning, I saw 100 head of elk, a herd of elk walk to a point where I could have probably thrown a rock at it. It would have been better because my shot missed, so maybe I should have thrown a rock at it. But they got me right onto animals immediately. It totally transformed my pursuit. Now, leading up to that day, I was a person that was frustrated and angry and thinking, what's the point in this pursuit? Until my pursuit was transformed because my perspective was transformed and it really became more clear what I was supposed to do, so that then the hunt actually became unbelievable and an adrenaline rush and one of the most incredible experiences of my life. Ironically, I already planned to share that with you, and last night, Angela found the DVD of my elk hunt, and we watched it, and I'm like, yes, I did kill that thing. See, I can prove it. Everybody thinks I'm lying. It took me 3 shots to kill one animal, but I had meat, and I have horns, or antlers, to prove it. Now, Ecclesiastes is a book written by Solomon documenting his hunting endeavors. Now, he's not hunting elk. He's not hunting deer. He's hunting purpose. He's in pursuit of joy and meaning for life. He's looking for significance. And he's walking, giving us this personal testimony of how, on the downside, from the earth perspective, he sought to find hope. He sought to find purpose, and he shares with us what he found. However, when he comes to the end of it, we're going to see he was kind of like me walking through the woods of Colorado wondering, what is the point? Now, what needs to happen in order for the pursuits of your life to not end like Solomon's did is there really needs to be a transformation. There needs to be a shift in perspective. Because as long as we are in pursuit of hope and meaning and significance with a downside up perspective, we are always going to be disappointed. But when we start to look at the pursuit from the upside down, it transforms my pursuits. And so instead of reading the entire passage, I want to give you the big idea, and we're going to read it chunk by chunk as we work through it. And so let's let this big idea be the fountain that trickles down into the rest of our passage and our study today. So write this down if you're in the habit of doing so. Upside down living transforms my real life pursuits. It transforms it. Just as I needed a transformation of perspective and abilities in my hunts for elk and deer and all of that, there needs to be a transformation of your real life pursuits. And that only happens when our perspective is changed from the downside up to the upside down, from earthly view to a heavenly view, from the temporal to the eternal. That's what's going on through the book of Ecclesiastes, through the wisdom and the testimony of Solomon. So what pursuits did Solomon go after? And what pursuits does living upside down transform? That's the question we should be asking. What pursuits? What pursuits does living upside down transform? I want you to see these because he lays them out for us all throughout this passage. And I want you to see. So here's how we're going to do this. When I live upside down, I pursue these 5 things. Number 1, when I live upside down, I pursue growth as grace. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Write that down and then let's go through it. I want you to look with me at chapter 1, verse 12. And I want you to see the testimony of what Solomon, the preacher, pursued in hopes that it would help him find some sort of purpose in life. So verse 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. Now look, here it is, verse 13. I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under the heaven. So my goal was to pursue through wisdom to learn all that was done under the heaven, on this earth, in this life. My heart was to learn and be educated. Skip the next part and go to verse 14. He says, I have seen everything that is done under the sun. I learned basically everything there is to learn, almost is what he's saying. I've considered it all. Look at verse 16 with me. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. So what he's giving us here is a picture of what he first pursued, and he was in pursuit of the growth of wisdom and knowledge and understanding. He went to the university. He sat in the classrooms. He had conversations with the different professionals and experts in their fields, and he began to learn, and he says, I grew and I pursued and I applied my heart to know all the wisdom and all of the knowledge that I could possibly get my hands on. I was a well-educated, knowledgeable person in everything. However, at the end of that journey for wisdom, I discovered that it was all pointless and hopeless. Look at verse 13. I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. And here's his conclusion. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I've learned all that I can learn. I'm the wisest guy that's ever been on earth before me and really probably after me. And I'm telling you that this is an unhappy business that God has given us to participate in. Look at verse 17. So I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And here's what he says. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. It's pointless. It's like striving after wind. It's like going after trying to collect wind. So this afternoon when it's breezy, I dare you to go out into your neighborhood and get a bottle and try to catch some wind and add it to your wind collection. Nobody has ever come and said, hey, pastor, check out my wind collection. It's a good one. Because we're like, bro, you're losing it. And that's the insanity that you need to look at somebody the next time they say, I'm hoping that my education gives me some sort of purpose and meaning in my life. And you say, bro, you might as well just go catch some wind because that's going to serve you just as good. That was Solomon's point. All of my work. Verse 14, I skipped that, but he says, I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity. And again, a striving after wind. It's a wind collection. Notice what he says in verse 15. He gives a little proverb. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. So after all of my knowledge, after all of my learning, after all of my wisdom, I realized that I never got smart enough to fix that was broken or to make up that which was lacking. In fact, my knowledge and my understanding of truth and my knowledge and my understanding of my wisdom only made me more aware of what was broken and more aware of what was lacking in our world. And it was hurtful because I realized in my knowledge, I could not come up with the answer to what was broken or what was lacking. That's why I love it when somebody always promises, I've got the best idea for what's going to change and transform our nation and our world. I've got it. I figured it out. And Solomon, the wisest man and the most educated man, said, I can't fix what is broken. In fact, that's what's so vain about my journey for wisdom and learning and understanding. And if you jump with me to verse 18, he says it this way, for in much wisdom is vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. The more I know, the more depressed I get. The more I know, the more I am aware of the fact that I can't fix that which is broken, and I cannot make up that which is lacking. I'm so frustrated because now my sorrow is increased, and it is vain. It is vain. I've read recently from multiple sources that the most educated people can become sometimes the most depressed and discouraged people. And one of the common reasons that was given in all of the articles I read is that the more they learn, the more they are aware of what the problems are and how little they can do to fix them. So he says, I pursued it and it is vain. It is vanity. So that's the downside up view. You understand? The downside up says get an education and get smart. If we educate everybody, everybody's going to get happy and we're all going to find really good jobs and everything's going to be great. And he says, no, the upside down view of wisdom and growth is that it is a grace, not a good end to try to shoot for. And what I mean by that is this. When I pursue wisdom, it should always inform me enough about who I am and what my needs are that I feel an ache to run to God. It's a grace. He said to Timothy, Paul did, that he was writing about the sacred writings which were able to make you wise unto salvation. So you were able to learn the truth and the reality of the world, which puts in you this awareness that you can't fix what is broken, but there is one who can. That you can't make up that which is not there, but there is one who can. So the more I learn, learning and education and growth in this area is not a good end to give me meaning and purpose, but it is a good way for me to recognize my desperate need for a Savior, and then I run to the Father for that help. So in essence, what he's saying, or what we see from the upside down, is that growth in understanding and education and wisdom is a grace that God has given us to help us be more aware of our desperate need for a Savior. It's a grace. So what he's leaning into hardcore here is, listen, your education and the reformation of education and your ability to become the smartest man on the earth is not ever going to give you some part of meaning and purpose in your life. It's empty, it's vain, it's hopeless, it's helpless. So then he says in chapter 2, when wisdom failed me, when education failed me, when growth failed me, I turned to pleasure. Notice what he says in verse 1 of chapter 2. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Well, pursuit of education didn't help, so I'm going to go and have some fun. Enjoy yourself. Have fun. Have a good time. Verse 2 says he had laughter, so he probably invited the top comedians in. He had the court jesters. They came in and made him laugh. And then he said of pleasure, he had some pleasure. Then he describes for us what that pleasure was. Verse 3, he says that he sought how to cheer his body with wine. And then he says in verse 4 that he made great works. I built houses. So he did these incredible things. He built houses, not just a house, houses. And if Solomon was the richest man on the earth, he did not build just shacks. He built houses. He was on Cribs. If you remember the show Cribs, that was him. He had the 11-car garage with all the Ferraris and the Teslas and the whatever else is in there. He had those. He built houses. He planted vineyards. He says in verse 4. Verse 5, I made myself gardens and parks. This guy made himself a park. A park. It wasn't just like a cool backyard. He made himself a park. Maybe there were playgrounds on it and swings. I don't know. But he made himself a park and he planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. Did you get what he said? I didn't just water a couple of trees in my backyard that produced some oranges and fruit. I made a pool that fed and watered a forest. This was legit. This was a big deal. And I went all in on this. He says in verse 7, I bought male and female slaves. I had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. If I wanted to ride a horse one day and another horse another day and never ride the same horse twice, I could do it. My garage was full. He says in verse 8, I also gathered for myself silver and gold, the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women. He had a choir, his personal choir. He could have told them every time I open my bedroom door in the morning, I want you there singing to me in beautiful harmony this song. That's what he had. He did things like had men and women. He had concubines. First Kings tells us he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. He had 1,000 women to do whatever he wanted them to do. In all of this pleasure seeking, he entered into a world of wickedness and desperate, disgusting lifestyle in search of pleasure and hope for his emptiness. Verse 9, I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. If the infomercial came on and said, you need this, he bought it. Every Super Bowl commercial, he's like, I'll take one, I'll take two, give me two. Every promise of the hope that a car brings, he bought it. Every new home that he needed, he went and got. If he saw a woman, he went and got her. He did that which was not that bad of a deal in building parks. That which was noble in helping people, and that which was downright wicked in using other people to meet his fantasies and his physical needs, he was after it. And in the end, it was like trying to start a wind collection. Because notice what he says. Follow along with me in the same way. Verse 1, he says, behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched my heart, and he goes down, and then he comes to verse 11. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. And so we've jumped now to point number 2, which means that the downside up view is I'm going to seek pleasure, but the upside down view is transformed. And so I seek pleasure, or I pursue pleasure with parameters. See, Solomon was in this hardcore, no parameters, no fence posts, no walls, no boundaries. He went all in for his pleasure. He abused people because you cannot seek unfettered pleasure without being incredibly selfish. And you cannot be incredibly selfish without taking an advantage of people. And that's what he did. It was unbridled, unhindered pleasure seeking. That's not what we do. I pursue pleasure. Pleasure's not the problem here. Pleasure's not the issue here. Pleasure is not bad. It's just when pleasure is unfettered and unbridled without the parameters. That's the downside up view, is saying, just go get it. Eat, drink, be merry. You want it, go. It's hedonism. Have fun. Sex, sleep around. Drugs, enjoy it. Drink. Go party. Get all that you can. Take all that you get and enjoy it and waste it and live after it. And that's not what the upside down view says. The upside down view is biblically informed, gospel influence, and it says, I'm going to pursue pleasure because that's from God, but I'm going to pursue pleasure in the confines and parameters that God has given me to enjoy it. So sex is not bad when it's enjoyed within the confines of marriage. Eating is not bad when it's enjoyed within the confines of not being a glutton. All of these things that God has given us, we're going to see in just a minute, are not the problem. The problem is when you and I seek to fill an emptiness that only God can fill in pursuit of the pleasures that this earth produces. That's where Solomon was. You following with that? You tracking with me here? Okay. So he sought these pleasures. He went after them recklessly and relentlessly in pursuit of all that he could without any parameters, downside up view. When that didn't deliver, he went to point number 3. And the downside up, he pursued prudence. Let me explain what I mean by that. So verse 12 says, so I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. I turned to consider the difference between living wise and the difference between living like a fool. Verse 13, I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. Good conclusion, Solomon. It's like we're getting somewhere. He's like, hey, look, I after pleasure failed me, after sleeping around failed me, after drugs failed me, after wine failed me, after all of these pursuits failed me, I stopped and said, well, I'm going to consider a different way. I'm going to consider actually trying to live wise. And he said, you know what? I came to a conclusion. It's better to live wise than to live like a fool. Can we agree with that? It's better to live wise than to live like a fool. Just as it is better to walk in the light than it is to walk in the dark. I am a testimony to that this very morning when I stubbed my toe on a kid's toy walking through the house in the darkness. It is better to turn on the light. That's what he's saying. It is better to walk in the light than it is to walk in darkness. In the same way, it is better to walk as the wise than it is the fool. In fact, he says in verse 14, the wise person has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet he comes to this crazy conclusion. Follow it with me. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. You get what he's saying? Like, it's better to walk like a wise than a fool, but a wise man walks out in the street and gets hit by a car, and a fool walks out in the street and gets hit by a car, and what's the difference? Go follow it with me. Then he says, why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool, so I hated life. Because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after wind. This dude was in a tough place, wasn't he? His downside up pursuit in life, his temporal pursuit of earthly pleasures and earthly pursuits has left him in a desperate place. Now, the upside down view, remember, we went to the back of the book first and said the actual view is to fear God and keep his commandments. That's the upside down view. That's the eternal view. The eternal view doesn't look at growing in wisdom as desperate and despairing. They look at it as a grace from God to learn more of God. He doesn't look at pleasure as this unbridled pursuit of joy and hope. This is a pursuit of pleasure in the parameters of God's will and God's plan. And he doesn't look at living prudent as an end to meet his needs and being self-righteous. He looks at prudence to be worked out with purpose. So when I live upside down, I pursue prudence with purpose. My purpose is what? My purpose isn't that my self-righteousness would give me some hope and give me some meaning and some purpose in life. But my prudence and my wise living doesn't come because of a pursuit of that meaning, but it comes out of a relationship with God that is already in existence. See, he's given us the view of a person who is not living in fear of God, keeping his commandments. We know that that's the purpose of our life. And so when we do that, we then can live prudently, walking after wisdom and not as fools, but not in order to get a relationship with God, but out of this relationship that we have with God. So he says, I pursued prudence. We say, who live upside down, I pursue prudence on purpose. Then notice where he goes. He says in verse 18, he stops and he looks around and he says, I hated all my toil, in which I toil under the sun. Man, life just stinks at this point. He's pursuing work. He's giving himself to work, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be the master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. Did you get the ache of this guy in his heart? The ache of what he was feeling? I looked at all of this work, all of this toil that I had done, all of this hard work that I had accomplished, all of this skill and wisdom and knowledge that I gave to my career. I poured myself into it, and then I realized that, wait a second, when I die, I can't take any of this with me, and I'm going to leave it to somebody to come behind me, and who knows whether he's going to be wise or a fool. And history tells us that the one who inherited it all was Rehoboam, who was in fact a fool and lost 80% of Dad's kingdom. So his despair just welled up inside of him. And he said, what is the point of all of this labor? What is the point of all of this work? My downside up view has brought me to the point where the pursuit of all of this toil and all of this work and all of this energy that I'm exerting for my kingdom and my career is pointless. Now, is that reality? Is work pointless? Is toil pointless? Well, no. That's the downside up view. The upside down view tells us that I pursue toil with targets. My targets are God's glory in my work, fulfilling God's plan for my life, providing for my family, using my work as a platform for which I can preach and teach the gospel to those around me, and I can use what I earn for the mission that God has called me to. So work, in fact, is not vain, it's not pointless, it's not empty, but when you're living from the downside up, it absolutely is. It absolutely fails to accomplish what you set out for it to accomplish, and at the end of it, you will say, I hated all my toil in which I toil. I'm frustrated and angry, and I have nothing to show for it. I read of a guy who was, to me, the epitome of this type of a reality. His name was Dennis R. Barnhart. He was 40 years old. He was the president and chief executive officer of Eagle Computer Incorporated. He was on his way home one night to see his wife and 3 children, and his red Ferrari veered out of control a block from company headquarters in Los Gatos in the Silicon Valley, and the car flew through the air. It tore about 20 feet of guardrail and crashed into a ravine, and he died upon arrival to the hospital. What was crazy about this was earlier that same day, Mr. Bernhardt's company went public, and shares sold at $15.50 a piece, and he owned 592,000 of them. So that morning, he became a millionaire with over $9 million, and later that afternoon, his red Ferrari crashed into a guardrail, and he died. And not 1 cent of the $9 million went with him, and he left it to his family, and who knows whether they are spending it and using it well or using it foolishly. That's the reality that Solomon is coming to. Now, I kind of used that all to introduce the main point. So that was my introduction, I promise you. Because he really gets to a point, because that's what Solomon does. You're like, oh, good, I thought that was a sermon. We got to get somewhere here. It's depressing, it's frustrating. He's saying, what is the American dream? Go to college, get a good education, get a master's degree, go after it. Then get a good job, work hard, lean yourself hard into a good career, work long hours, and then build nice houses, drive nice cars, and just eat, drink, be merry, enjoy your life. And along the way, live right, live wise, and treat people right. That's what he did. He sought after wisdom, chapter 1, 14 through 18, 12 through 18. He sought education and he learned. Then he gave himself to pleasure, chapter 2, 1 through 11. He walked wisely, not giving in too hard to foolishness. He's living right, treating people right. That's chapter 2, 12 through 17. And then he worked hard. And at the end of every one of these journeys, he came to the same conclusion. What's the point? What's the point? Because from the downside up, he was hoping that education would give his life meaning, and it didn't deliver. He was hoping that pleasure would give his life purpose, and it didn't deliver. He was hoping that living and walking wisely and prudently would give his life some sort of purpose, and it didn't deliver. He was hoping that his work and his career would give him some kind of purpose, and it didn't deliver. The problem was that he expected something from these things that they were never capable of delivering, because he was living life from the downside up, hoping that down here he would take care of all of these things and it would help him to make his way up to this upside reality. But that's not how life works. The upside down view says education's not bad as long as it's seen as a grace. Pleasure's not bad as long as it's enjoyed in the parameters that God gives us. Walking prudently is not bad as long as it is for a purpose given to us by God. Working hard is not bad as long as it is lived on purpose or executed on a purpose or with targets that God gives us. And then when that's the reality, the fifth point can be a reality, and this is our final pursuit. And that's verse 24. And before I read it, all throughout the passage we just read, there's not very much mention of God. There's one mention of God in all of the passages I just read, and it was actually back in chapter 1, verse 13, where he actually seemed to blame God for all of the emptiness of life. It's a tough life. It's a hard life. This is a difficult thing that God has given us to the children of men to be busy with. It's his fault. So that type of attitude. In fact, what I did in chapter 2, I went through and underlined all of the personal pronouns that were used. My heart, my body, my pleasures, whatever my eyes wanted. I gave to myself. I built myself. I did all of this for myself. It was self-centered. And all of the self-centered pursuits and all of the self-centered life led him to this place of utter despair and frustration, to the point where he figured, I probably would be more happy collecting wind than doing these things. And then all of a sudden in verse 24, there's a little glimmer of hope and a little glimmer of happiness that bursts through. And that's because he reintroduces God back to the situation. Notice what he says. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Like that was worth your time today, right there. Because in all of his journeys, in all of his pursuits, he's going down these roads and he's turning around saying, that's a cul-de-sac, that's a dead end. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. And he said, really, I've come to this conclusion. In all of my pursuits of emptiness and frustration and vanity and hurt, I've come that all of that is vain, and there is no enjoyment in this life apart from God. And so when I am living upside down, I am, lastly, pursuing God as giver. I pursue God as giver. The preacher is beginning to see the difference that it makes to live with God at the center. Phil Ryken said these verses are an oasis of optimism in a wilderness of despair. Martin Luther called the end of Ecclesiastes 2 a remarkable passage, one that explains everything preceding and following it. It is the principal conclusion. So here's a guy who's lived the way that you think if you would be happy. If I just got that pleasure, if I just got that job, if I just accomplished this task, if I just got that education, these are the reasons why I'm unhappy, because I have all of these things that I hope will meet my need, and they always leave me empty. And after all of those, Solomon says, the only hope that I have of finding happiness in this desperately wicked, hopeless, and vain life is that when my joy is centered on a relationship with God. That is the only hope I have, because who can eat and who can have enjoyment apart from him? He embraces some of the very activities that he has already rejected. Eating and drinking do nothing for me. So the very things that became a burden to him and a source of vanity and vexation to him actually became sources of enjoyment, because they weren't seen as the end. God was now the end, and he saw that these are gifts from God. And so those things that served to bring despair are now serving to bring some kind of enjoyment, because his perspective shifted from downside up to upside down. You tracking with that? No longer is he in pursuit of those things to meet a need that only God could fill. He starts with God to meet the need that only God could fill, and now those things are seen in their proper place. And instead of being bitter and sour, he starts to see them as enjoyable and something to be cherished, because they are gifts from God. So he's in pursuit of God as the giver. That's his point. No one can find true joy in anything apart from him. It oozes with contentment. This is consistent with the Bible elsewhere. In 1 Timothy 4, the Bible says in chapter 4, verse 4, everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving. It's good. We enjoy it. Earthly pleasures are a gift from God. My job is a gift from God, and when I see my job as a gift from God and not the source of my hope and fulfillment, I can start to enjoy my job, because I realize God gave me this job. My home that God gave me is perfectly designed and specifically, sovereignly given to me by God, and I'm there in my neighborhood at this place for this time, and I enjoy it differently. Rather than making my home be the source of my joy, it is now enjoyed because God is the source of my joy, and my home is seen as a gift from a God who loves me. You get that? My marriage is not the source of my joy. I cannot expect my spouse to be the hope and meaning of my life. I can't, because I will forever resent her for not doing what I think she needs me. I need her to do. I will forever be disappointed in how she's failed meeting the need that I think I need. And so this is what disillusioned people do when they start to convince themselves, I just need a different wife. And that's wrong and that's foolish. The hope that you have in your life is not your spouse, it's your God. And then when God is the source of my emptiness and my joy, then I can start to enjoy my wife as a gift from the God who's met my deepest longings and my needs. We could put that into every context of your life. Every context of your life that fits. And enjoy, I say, and embrace the ache that everything on earth leaves you with. Because that ache should serve you to push you towards God and meeting that need that you have with him. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Follow that? It's good, right? Like it took me a while to get there, but we got there. We got there. So I see life differently. Let's just make sure this settles, and I'm going to give you some learning to live. We see life differently. Growth in wisdom is not an end. It's a horrible master. But when I see growth as God's grace, oh, that's a change. That transforms everything. I go to school and I learn and I read, not because that's an end in itself, but because it's the ability that I have that God gave me so that I can know more about him and his creation. I don't see pleasure as an end. I enjoy pleasures with parameters because God gave me pleasures with parameters. He gave me 5 senses to enjoy these things that he's created. So I, upside down, see pleasures with parameters. I don't see walking wisely as an end. I'm not self-righteous. Downside up, people say, I'm a good person. See, Solomon's talking to you. I'm a good person. I'm self-righteous. I don't live like Solomon did. I treat people right. I'm not after those things. And he says, no, that's going to leave you just as empty as living as a fool. You're going to die the same death. So I don't see walking wisely and prudently as an end. I walk wisely and prudently on a purpose to glorify God with my life because he who is holy has called me to be holy, and my relationship leads to that. I don't see my job as an end. You who are convinced that if you just worked a few more hours, got that next promotion, got that next raise, got that corner office, that you'd find some sort of joy. No, you're seeing it wrong. So I don't see that when I live from the upside down. I don't toil for the point of toiling. I toil on a target. And at the end of it all, I pursue the God as giver. So upside down living transforms my real life pursuits. When our life is turned upside down, we start living with a heavenly perspective as opposed to an earthly perspective, and our pursuits are transformed. And instead of pursuing the things in this life as a source of meaning, we place God at the center of our pursuit of meaning, and these things serve us rather than are served by us. That's the heart of the sermon today from Solomon. So my heart for you is this, if Christ is not the center of your life, then you will continually and perpetually be dissatisfied with your life. If everything that is your pursuit does not center around fear God and keep his commandments and live after him and find enjoyment in them because they are from the hand of God, then friend, you will forever be disappointed. And that empty, sinking feeling that you're feeling right now will continue and continue and continue. There is no better hope around the next turn, around the next corner. The answer for your emptiness, the answer for your despair, the answer for your view of vanity and I hate life is God through Jesus Christ. Now here's the cool thing, and I promise we're done. The Old Testament author, Solomon, was transformed because he, by faith, celebrated a future promise of God. So he was transformed because he said, God promised that one day something big is going to come and happen and transform everything. And so he put a period on the end of this because he looked forward to something God had promised was going to happen. We in the New Testament know what that something is. That something is Jesus Christ. And so we look back and see that it wasn't something in the future that was promised, but it was something that was settled in the person of Jesus Christ. So what you're searching for is not a future promise. It's a settled fact that Jesus came to save you from the emptiness of this earth. And where Solomon put a period, we put an exclamation point. There is no hope in this world. It is only found in a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And if you don't have that, bro, you're missing it. And you will forever wander through the dark, stubbing your toe on the Legos, hoping that around the next corner you'll find what you're looking for. And pardon my poor English, but it ain't there. It ain't there. For apart from him, who can eat or have any enjoyment? Learning to live. Write these down. A couple questions. Number 1, who determines what I chase? If I'm the master of my own life, then I have no hope. If I am influenced by the marketing of the world and listen to them tell me that my joy is found somewhere down here, then I am going to be frustrated. But if my pursuits are biblically influenced and gospel-centered, then I begin to pursue these things differently. I stop pursuing them and expecting from them something they cannot deliver. I stop expecting them to deliver something God never designed for them to deliver, and they are not capable of delivering. So unless the Bible and the gospel and God defines what I pursue, then you're going to forever be disappointed. So let's change who determines that. Number 2, what grid do I use to evaluate my pursuits? So how are you marketing or adding up profit versus loss? Over and over again, Solomon says, what profit is there? So how are you evaluating them? What's your value system? Listen, if you are valuing or finding value or hoping to find value, I'm going to say this explicitly and black and white. If you are hoping to find value in your life in anything other than God through Jesus, it will disappoint you. It will disappoint you. And so often we here in our world, we value relationships and we value careers and we value bank accounts and we value neighborhoods and we value all of the things that never can deliver. We value the popularity. We value the success. We get to a midlife crisis and we say, what in the world have I accomplished? Because we value the wrong things. But when I value that which is the one thing that can meet my deepest need, a relationship with God through Christ, then it changes everything. So ask yourself that question and be honest with yourself. And then lastly, let me give you number 3. How can my pursuits be platforms for the gospel? How can my pursuits be platforms for the gospel? The world we live in is wallowing in despair, finding disappointments at every turn. When my pursuits are seen clearly, not as a source of my meaning and joy, but places where my fear of God and keeping his commandments is lived out, I can then start to use my pursuits and not be used by my pursuits. So I use my job, my pleasures, my gifts, my opportunities to take people from their emptiness and point them to God. This allows me the opportunity to speak the gospel into people because that's not only the only hope for your joy, it's the only hope for their joy and meaning and purpose. And that's one of the purposes that we find in all of this. So ask that. How are my pursuits platforms for the gospel? How am I using them for him? Upside down living transforms my real life pursuits. Let's pray.